Let's see. And we are recording. Lovely. Hello, hello. Welcome to LinkedIn Live with Lauren and Lisa. It's alliteration at LPC. We love alliteration, so it's perfect. Last week we had a Lily. This week we have a Lisa. If you don't have an L name, you can't be on this show.
No, we don't want you.
Well, welcome, Lisa. So excited to have you. So I'll let you do a little intro, but so Lisa is a good friend. I've known her for 2 years. We are in a group that Lisa created that she's going to talk about and tell us all about. It's called Blue Mala, and it's just been such a godsend for me as a highly anxious gal. So Lisa, tell everybody who you are and a little bit about what you do. And we'll talk about, since this is about writing, I really want to understand, how you decided to write a book and kind of what's it like to write a book when you're not an author. Because I think approximately 99.9% of the people watching this are not authors but have a beautiful story to tell. And I want to encourage people that you don't need to be Anne Rice in order to tell your story. So let's hit it. Give us the elevator spiel.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me. I've never done a LinkedIn Live, so this is my first time. It's very exciting. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I do a lot of things. I am a writer. I am a mindfulness coach. I am a speaker. I am a yoga teacher. I founded and am the director of a nonprofit. I am a retired former child actor. And I am an anxious person. So I sort of embrace all of those things in what I do. So I have written 2 books. One was about my childhood growing up in the film industry. I started working as an actor when I was 4, retired when I was 22 from that career. So it was all about what it's like to grow up in Hollywood and what it's like to realize that this is not the authentic path for you. This is not what I wanted to be doing with the rest of my life, and sort of how that story, I think, even though it was very specific and very odd, and a look at my life, I think a lot of people have had that experience of, gosh, I've been doing this thing just because I've been doing it for a really long time. It's more out of momentum than it is out of passion or purpose. And so the first book is about that. Second book is all about mental health. I have struggled with anxiety and depression and a panic disorder since I was a kid, and talking about how I moved through that. I'm continuing to move through that.
Yeah.
What are the things that were helpful for me? And then I interview tons of other people about what they are struggling with and what has been helpful for them. And so out of that second book right there came Blue Mala, which is basically the culmination of everything I wish I had known when I was struggling most. Yep. So it is an online community. We have yoga classes, we have meditation classes. I have tons of videos of mindfulness techniques. I have articles about mental wellness, and we have our weekly meeting where we get together and talk about anything and everything. And so that's sort of how we connected, and it's such a beautiful thing to have a space where that you are welcomed and other people really get it, because I think community is something we are all really starving for.
Yeah. And I think the unique thing, even though, you always say you had a weird upbringing, but I think the interesting thing for you is that that's a life that a lot of people feel like, oh, I would love to be an actor. So the reality is it's not all, flowers and roses. So to hear someone say, like, I stepped away from this life, I think that's really important for people to hear. And I think the fact that you wrote about it really makes that difference, because people can really dive into your story and understand like what led you to that point. Funny enough, I actually read your books backwards. I read the first one first, the second one first, and then the first one, I listened to your audiobook.
Amazing.
My guilty pleasure is celebrity audiobooks. So I just thought it was really helpful. And I think for that, in that first book, you really did kind of lay the foundation of how mental health is, the crux of everything. If you don't have your mental health, who cares what your career is? You could be the Queen of England, and if you don't have your mental health, it doesn't matter. So why did you decide to write a book? And was that a very daunting task? Because I think a lot of people, I talk about my mental health journey a lot, and people are always like, oh, I could never do it. How do you write about it? And a book is on my bucket list. So even personally, I would love to know, obviously, you can self-publish these days and whatnot, but less about that and more about like, how it's so daunting to think about writing a book. And then, of course, all the kind of semantics of getting a book published is probably on the plate too. So tell us a little bit about the book writing process.
So writing is something I have always had a passion for. It's something that I've always done as a way to just sort of process the world and the things that were happening in my life. And I think especially when I made this huge decision, which very few people in my life supported, by the way. Everyone told me that I was making the wrong decision, that I had the golden ticket and I was ripping it up, and that I had this ideal life as a working actor, and what the hell was I thinking? So I really had to reframe what success looked like, because I theoretically had it, but I was miserable. So I knew that I needed to write through that to really figure out what I thought. So I didn't really sit down thinking I am going to write a book and then publish a book and then do a book tour. That wasn't it was very much, I want to write something because I want my story down on paper. I can't just hold it inside me anymore. I just want it to be something that I've thought about deeply and processed and have kind of removed from myself a little bit. That catharsis. And it really wasn't until I finished the book. So I have known a lot of people who have wanted to write books and who have been like, oh, I've been writing this book for 10 years. I didn't want to do that. I essentially said to myself, I will write a book for a year. If that means I get an entire book written, great. If that means I get 10 pages written, great. But I have this year to write my story, whatever that is. Is it essays? Is it a book? Is it a journal entry? Whatever it is, I will give myself a year. And I had essentially a completed book in 10 months, because once I started writing it, it was just like a freight train.
Flowing,
So I was very lucky that way, and I really enjoy the process of writing a book. So that was actually incredibly enjoyable. The shift that I made a little bit later, when I talked to my husband about it, talked to some friends about it, I slowly started showing pieces of it to trusted readers. And they said, you should try to get this published, because it's not just, oh, look at me, here's this weird story of a childhood in LA. It is this moment that so many of us come to, where we wake up one morning and go, wait a minute, am I really living a meaningful, purposeful life? And so that was really what made me shift and say, okay, this actually is a book, and I need help making it a book, editing it properly, and things like that. And then I shifted to getting a literary agent and getting a publisher. And that was very stressful, but the writing was really enjoyable.
And hopefully, this show today is going to encourage people that are, just thinking about even getting their thoughts on paper. And one thing that you mentioned that I agree with, and I just want to reiterate for people watching, is that, first of all, Lisa gave herself a year. So I think that's important, is to kind of set some timelines on yourself so you don't feel it's this never ending journey. And secondly, which I agree very wholeheartedly with, is that you kind of gave yourself enough time to separate from everything that, from the journey. I think that's probably a mistake that people make. They start to tell the story while they're still in it because, like you said, you're processing it. And I was, after I left my job and decided to find a more authentic life, I said, I know I'm going to talk about my mental health challenges. I'm just not there yet. So don't feel like you have to write right away. I think one thing people could do is just start journaling. If you don't already, a lot of people probably do. And I love that you showed trusted people. That's kind of what I did too when I first started blogging. It was just like, hey, do you want to check this out? And find people that are honest and will be like, yeah, no, Lauren, this is way too TMI, or like not feeling the vibe, or like, this is amazing, you have a book, like your friend said. So
yeah. And I think another thing that I would just say for folks who are considering it is that we can kind of jump way ahead. And when you're in the writing, you could sort of be like, are people going to like this? Who's the audience going to be? And I don't know, someone might be mad and all of those sorts of things.
Exactly, yeah.
And those are legitimate. You need to know who your audience is. You need to, if you're writing something in the style of memoir, like I did, if you're writing about your life, if there are other people involved, yeah, there are some logistics there that you need to work out. But don't think about that yet. Just get everything on paper, because the first version of my first book was probably twice as long as the finished book ended up being. And I realized there were stories that I wrote just because I needed to write them. Right. There were stories because there were people I was still pissed off at. There were stories I wanted to tell because I thought I looked cool in them. Like, there were things I wanted to write, but that didn't mean that was something necessarily that a reader needed to read. And so that was a really important lesson that I learned, that it's like, just write it, just get in that habit and really refine that muscle of writing. And then you can figure out, all right, is this tailored appropriately to your audience? Is your, Aunt Sally going to be mad about it? Like all of that stuff you can do later. It's so hard to just write. So just focus on that and
get the writing out. Yeah, that is so interesting. And I do feel like people do feel like they have to censor themselves. Oh, like, I don't want anyone to be mad or whatnot. But, I think that's where kind of starting in little like spurts is helpful. Just start with something you do feel comfortable with. That's kind of what I did, is like, I kind of talked about it on a tertiary level. And then once I saw the good kind of feedback, I was like, okay, I can dive in a little bit more. So maybe that's what it's about, is kind of like testing the waters a little bit until you finally feel like you can dive in. But so the first book was a memoir. Now the second one was more of like a collection of stories. What made you decide to do that? And was that a different process as far as like writing goes? I love those types of books, the kind of where they incorporate little stories and whatnot. So I thought that was brilliant. So I would love to know, what inspired that.
Yeah. So with the second book, it is a little bit of memoir. It's sort of my story with mental wellness, kind of woven in with a lot of interviews with all kinds of people, whether it's like grade schoolers who have sensory disorders, or military veterans with post-traumatic stress, or folks who are struggling with body dysmorphia, or, anything that really has to do with mental wellness. I think in the second book, coming on the heels of the first book, I was a little tired of talking about myself. I was like, okay, this is a lot of me. And
I know.
I really liked the idea of interviewing other people
I
and
love
pulling
that.
in
Yeah.
their stories. And I think, the way that we are in community with other people is such a beautiful thing to me. And so being able to take other people's stories and really show the ways that, yes, the specifics might seem really different, but the underlying human emotions and human experiences that we all go through, it's really, really similar.
Yeah.
So I wanted people, right? The book is called Not Just Me. I wanted people to feel less alone. So I wanted to interview lots of different people so that folks could see themselves reflected in these stories and have some ideas of things that they could try to feel a little bit better. And so interviewing people was so much fun. I really enjoyed that.
How did you pick the people? Like, how did you find them?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of everything. There were a few people that as soon as I realized I was writing a book, I was like, oh, I know this person, and I think their story would be fantastic to tell. And then if there was a topic I wanted to explore that, I didn't know anyone who had experienced that, I just went out to social media. I just went out to my entire community, whether that's, friends or people I've worked with or people online, of like, hey, I want to talk to someone who's had this experience. Would anyone be willing to talk to me?
Did you have a good response, or were people a little hesitant?
I am always amazed at how many people are willing to share when they feel safe and when they feel like they can truly be heard, when they have the appropriate space and time to really tell their stories. And then they're like, you're going to change my name though, right? It's like, yeah.
Don't you worry. No, we are putting Lauren Perner from Boston, Massachusetts, right in that book. Don't you worry.
Here's your phone number if you want to have it.
I know, yeah. I mean, unless you want to be a client, but no. So tell me a little bit about you. So you wrote the books, but you're still very active as a writer. You have an awesome newsletter that I'm diligent about. You write blogs. You talked about the blogs on the Blue Mala site. You're also a speechwriter because you are a speaker. So those are all kind of different formats. You're still using that, like, underlying theme of mental wellness and kind of how you came through your journey. Do you find that you have to like tap into a different part of the brain for those stories? Obviously, your story is your story, but I think sometimes when I'm like writing my newsletter versus like my journal entry, it's a different process. So would love to hear about your process.
So I started doing a weekly Substack newsletter, and it's called a newsletter, but it is deeper writing than like, oh, here's where I'm doing a speaking event this week. It is it is a creative outlet for me. And I think for a little while I found the deadline of having to write every week to be a little bit stressful. And I was like, oh my God, I have to write the newsletter. What am I going to write about? And then I started thinking about it like strength training. Like, I want to continue to write. I am a writer in the deepest part of my soul. And so having this obligation, this deadline, right? If I don't get a newsletter out on Friday, the world does not end, right? It does not matter. This is self-imposed.
We will be fine. Yeah.
But it is a commitment that I have made and I stick with it. And I feel like making writing a little bit less precious which is for a while I was like, oh, I can only write when I'm deeply inspired.
Yeah.
Like, no, screw that. I am a writer. I can write when I need to write.
Yeah.
A dentist doesn't go into work and they're not
I
like,
don't really
I
go to
don't
her
feel
teeth today.
inspired to do a root canal today. No, you do it, right? It's your
Yeah,
job. And I think making that mental and emotional shift was incredibly powerful for me,
I love
because
that.
now I look at my weekly newsletter as, oh yay, I get a chance to really strengthen my writing muscle and
I love
to
that.
be able to call on my writing whenever it's required, and not just
Yeah.
waiting for some like ethereal thing
Moment.
to come to me. And so I think, for folks who are interested in doing more writing, setting up some sort of
That's
like
huge. Yeah.
arbitrary deadline for yourself, even if it's just writing, 3 paragraphs, it can really help you to understand that it's something you own. It's something that is part of you, and you don't have to be inspired. You don't have to be feeling like a brilliant writer to get things down on the page. Most of us writers never feel like we're brilliant writers. We just sit
Yeah,
down
not
and
until
do.
after I've rewritten it a few times. And that is huge. That's actually a huge lesson for me too, because I've definitely struggled with the accountability piece
Mhm.
of writing. And so I shout out to my friend Beth Knaus, who runs a writing group, and she has prompts. It's twice a month, and she always encourages us, like, just write. Like, even if you can't write with the prompt, just go. And that's been a really helpful like, kind of trick for me too. Like, even if I just start writing like, Beth, this is the stupidest prompt,
Yeah.
It gets you going. I've actually
Right.
never said that. So for the record, I
Sorry.
love weird prompts. But it's been a very interesting lesson for me to like, yeah, use that muscle in a different way. So I love that. And so my last question here is really, why did you decide to couple the writing with these? So Lisa runs not one, but two groups in addition to being all these things, like, and she just like went on an amazing trip to California. I think she cloned herself. So tell us why you decided to start the groups. And also, I think people will probably want to know what your connection to the veterans community is too. Love to hear both your thoughts on that, and just explain a little bit more about Blue Mala so people know.
Absolutely. So please check out Blue Mala. It is just the sweetest community on the internet. It really is so, so lovely. So you can go to bluemala.com, blue like the color, MALA.com. And I have a lot of free content on there. So yoga, meditation, and therapeutic writing were the 3 practices that really made a massive shift for me in terms of my mental wellness. It's still something I have to work on every day, but those things are really supportive for me, really preventative, and really help me in the moment when I'm struggling. So Blue Mala is pay what you can, which was really important to me because I know so many people are struggling financially, and everyone deserves to be able to take care of their mental
Yeah,
illness.
I love that.
So it is a monthly membership that is pay what you can. And then you get weekly yoga, weekly meditation, weekly community meetups, and then the library of, hundreds and hundreds of past classes. So it's just sort of everything I wished that I had when I was struggling most.
Yeah.
And it really is intended to remind people that they're not alone, remind people that there are practices out there that are very, very helpful that you can do at any time, right? It's 3:00 in the morning, you are having a spin out panic attack. Boom, there's going to be a meditation that is available for you in that moment on demand. So that was really what I wanted to create with Blue Mala. I was teaching and leading workshops all over the country, doing a lot of live programming, and of course COVID. So Blue Mala was sort of born out of COVID. And
yes, that's right.
I love the fact that it's so accessible for people.
Yeah.
So that's Blue Mala. So yes, two companies, one company, one nonprofit.
Yes.
About 6 years ago, I was invited to come and teach a writing program on a veterans mindfulness retreat.
Awesome.
I knew nothing about military veterans.
Yeah.
I really don't think I had ever talked to anyone in the military before. I had no clue what I was doing, but I was writing this book and I needed more content. So I was like, yes, I'm going to come, and this is going to be a total cluster. And then I'll have something good to write about. But I went and I found this community that, interestingly enough, like felt kind of like we felt on a film set. It was this
that's so cool.
very close family that was created. And I talked about, that there's only one thing I miss about being in the film industry. And that is that closeness that you felt on the set. You feel like a family. You are working long hours. You are usually in a location that is not your home. You are, you eat together, you work together, you're sleeping in the same place. You get very close very fast. And then the film ends and everyone disperses. And one of the veterans I was talking to says, she said, it sounds an awful lot like deployment. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And when we get out of our time in service, we deeply, deeply miss that sense of camaraderie.
Community. Yeah.
And so it's like, I was missing that on film sets. They were missing that in their time in service. And I was like, there is so much about the military I don't understand, but I get camaraderie and I can provide that for them. And so Mission Flexible came out of that. And so we run 4-day intensive mindfulness retreats for veterans who are dealing with some type of post-traumatic stress. And we lead them all over the country. We do yoga, we do meditation, we do cold plunge, we do equine therapy with horses, we, go climb mountains, we go hiking, we do acupuncture, all kinds of things in order to just really reconnect with what is going to serve our mental wellness. So yeah, it's something it's definitely a passion project for me. And it's been so beautiful to watch these practices that were maybe once considered like this sort of esoteric hippie become so kind of fundamental and honestly like save lives. And it's been really beautiful to see that.
Oh, that's awesome. One thing that I do want to talk about in the fall is community building. So, how do you turn your writing and your books and your, blog into a community? So that's a perfect setup and really confirms what, I want to talk about with this audience is like, how do you turn your story into a community? How do you create that authentic storytelling as a marketing tool for your personal brand or your business if you're an entrepreneur? And anything else that you think our audience would be helpful to know? I mean, one thing that I know, I've taken 2 of Lisa's classes, and one thing people always ask you is, did Lisa was in Mrs. Doubtfire, and I think one thing, I didn't really want to talk about that, but one thing I do want to mention is that Robin Williams was a very active mental health, outspoken, kind of before it was cool. Did that influence you? And I'm asking because I think that maybe if people are hesitant to tell their story, but they know they have a story, lean on those people that you can see. I mean, even if you don't know them, lean on those people that tell their story. That's kind of what I do when I, like Selena Gomez has a really cool community whenever I'm like feeling like, and obviously like, oh, I don't know if I want to tell this. I just think like, well, someone's done this before, Lauren. Like, you're not the first person to tell your story. So do you feel like that kind of inspired you a little bit to tell your mental health story?
Absolutely. Robin was the first person who really spoke very honestly and in a very vulnerable way to me about mental wellness. I had anxiety when we filmed Doubtfire. That, you know, I was 14 at the time. It's hard to be 14, and
Yeah, I was like,
really
that's an
hard to be
anxious
a
time in
14-year-old.
life, let alone, you
Yeah.
know.
And so, you know, Robin talked to me a lot about mental wellness, and he really was the first person that made me feel like, oh, I'm not alone. Other people struggle with this. Okay, let me be a little bit more open, because I so often just felt like, oh, I have to hide this, and I have to feel ashamed. And
Exactly.
I think what he really taught me is that when we tell our story, we're talking about us collectively, right? It's not just, oh, hey, look at me, I am an anxious mess, you know, like that's not
No
what
one's doing that.
we are offering up our story, because we are saying to other people, you're allowed to tell your story too. And I don't want you to feel like you're going through this alone. And so I think that was what made a really strong shift for me, away from hiding and feeling like, oh, I don't want a TMI, to, all right, what I'm doing is I'm offering up the things that I went through, so that maybe they can be a guidebook for someone else. Maybe they can show someone else that there are some ways that you can do this. And even if my way of doing this is not your way of doing this, it's going to model that we can get through this. And so making that shift for me was difficult, and it took some time, but I definitely think Robin modeling that for me had a massive influence on my ability to, you know, stand up in front of companies and say, like, here's what I struggle with, and here are some of the things that we can do together to make everyone's life a little easier.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to talk about that, because I do feel like that's why I do it. You know, I'm not here just to like tell you guys how I've been a little anxious mess since I was 6. I do it because of that one person that commented on a blog once that said, "I read your blog and you saved my life." You know, so lean on other people that are doing it, whether, you know, it's someone like Robin Williams or someone like little Lauren Perna. Following other people that do this is what has inspired me beyond measure. So,
yeah. There's a saying, I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, but I think I'll get the heart of it correct, that one of my veteran friends told me, which is, when you're walking through a minefield, walk in someone else's footsteps.
Yeah, I love that.
Right?
Mental health is a minefield.
It is a minefield.
Good
This
Lord.
is a minefield. Absolutely.
It really is. Any final, like, anything coming up? Any cool things for people to know besides join Blue Mala?
Yeah, so I am going to be doing a weekend workshop up at Omega. So it's going to be similar to the ones that that Lauren has done with me. They're so much fun.
I've been a diligent attendee.
I appreciate it. So it's at the Omega Institute, which is in upstate New York. And so we're going to have a weekend. It's Friday through Sunday, and we're going to do a deep dive into all of these topics. So it's how to use yoga, writing, meditation in order to improve your mental wellness. We're going to talk about a lot about burnout, because that's something that so many people are struggling with now. And, you know, how do we prevent burnout? Like, how do we keep ourselves from getting to that point? So yeah, that's going to be in June. So I'm really looking forward to that. And there are still spaces available for that. So come join me to that in person.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. And thank you guys for tuning in. This has been such a pleasure. Next week, we are going to be talking with a woman named Tara Bodine, and she's going to talk about how to write about mental health from kind of an HR perspective. I wanted to give all different types of perspectives about writing about HR, writing about mental health. And I thought it was important for our listeners to understand, if you own a company or you're part of a company or you're looking for a new company, what kind of cues should you look for? What can you say? What can't you say? So that should be fun. So yeah. All right, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Bye.